Hi, this is Ellen from Rent Roll Starter. Today I wanted to chat to you about what we should be doing if we're struggling to rent a rental property out. Now, I know that in Australia there are different areas that are experiencing really different demands on rental properties. So I've worked in property management since I was significantly younger. So I probably started a little over 15 years ago. And when I started, I was working in a regional town, a town of about 40,000 people. It was before we were using the internet to market rental properties, and we were mostly using for rent sheets, your listing sheets, that people would come to different offices and actually pick up a brochure and see what was available for rent, and if we leased something we would actually stamp a leased stamp across that particular property. Now, at that time of the market where I was working, I now look back and realise that our rental market probably wasn't that strong. In fact, we would quite often have several days to several weeks of vacancy. But I was 18 years old and it was my first job in real estate, so I didn't realise what an issue that was for investors. As we moved forward and as the years went on, vacancy actually reduced in that agency, and we had a very, very low vacancy rate. And then as I went on to work in more metropolitan areas, I discovered that vacancy for that period of time in that area was incredibly low. So I didn't have to work too hard to rent out a property. But occasionally you would have that one property that was really difficult to rent. Or perhaps you're located in an area that has had an increase in rental vacancy. And so you're experiencing this across the board, and there are lots of towns in Australia at the moment who are experiencing this, where it's just really hard to rent out a rental property at the moment. You have to work so much harder. So when it comes time to dealing with a rental property that is difficult to lease out, what do you do about it? I know that as a property manager, there are certain things that you can do, and there are certain things that you need to look to your landlord to get approval to do. So I'm going to share a few things with you that I found useful for when either we had a higher vacancy rate for a period of time, or we just had a difficult to rent out property. And you know the types of properties that are just that little bit more difficult to rent out. So I'm going to share a couple of things with you. Now, the first thing is to remember the 3 Ps. They are presentation, promotion, and price. So what you need to look at is, how is the property presented? Now, there are certain things that you can do as the property manager, and there are certain things that you need to get your landlord to do. So you need to talk to your landlord about presenting the property appropriately to attract the style of tenant that he or she is wanting. But the stuff that you can do as a property manager is you can work out, what's the best time of day to show this property? Do we have electricity at the property? Can we show it later in the day or earlier in the day? Do we need lights on? You can look at what time of the day the temperature is the best in the property. So you can do things like that to make sure the presentation is the best. I know that for me, I used to arrive at an open home at least 20 minutes early. And I know that that can feel really overwhelming when you're running 15-minute open homes and you've got a zillion of these things to do on a Saturday morning. Adding an extra 20 minutes to each open home can be really frustrating. But if you've got a property that's difficult to rent out, you'll be really pleased that you did it. So I used to arrive about 20 minutes early, open up all the windows, all the curtains, all the blinds to let as much natural light in as possible. If we had power on at the property, all the lights would be turned on. In the bathrooms, I'd even, unless it was really, really hot, I would even turn the heat lights on in the bathroom because of the beautiful warm light that would give to the bathroom, and that always made the bathrooms look bigger and brighter and cleaner. I also used to do a few things like bring a scented candle to the property, and a really good quality scented candle so that it would really permeate through the whole house and make the house smell delicious and warm if it was winter, or fresh if it was spring. So I would change my scented candles according to the season and what sort of a feel I wanted to create within the property. I used to do other little things as well, like have a bowl of individually wrapped mints or fantails or Sherbies or whatever lollies that you want to have at the property. And while lollies don't rent out a property, they help with the presentation of the property and the experience that a tenant has at the property when they're having a look through. So ultimately, I just wanted to make sure that the property that I showed these tenants on that particular day was the one that they remembered the most when they got home and they were looking through all the brochures of the houses they looked at that day. So if it was a difficult property to rent, presentation was a must. Now the second P is promotion. So if you've got the property presented really well, then you need to promote it adequately. So usually this means you need to make sure that your landlord gets professional photography on the property. So that means hire a professional photographer, get somewhere between 3 and 12 images taken. I used to find that 5, 6, 7 images were usually enough for the average size rental property. And make sure that when you're promoting it, you promote your feature image as the most attractive image. So what I found was, for a family home, if the kitchen and living area were this beautiful big open area and the kitchen was lovely and fresh and modern, that would be the image that I promoted as my primary image on all of my online marketing. So you also need to make sure that you're advertising your property on all of the real estate platforms so that you're getting high exposure. In some cases, you may also advertise on some other platforms like gumtree.com.au, or even Facebook Marketplace is coming into an area where people are actually promoting their properties for rent as well, and Facebook Marketplace is certainly growing at the moment, so you want to get on that bandwagon as quickly as you can. Now you also need to make sure that as part of your promotion, you're writing really good copy for your property. So that's really good quality advertising text to make sure that the property really appeals to people, so that they're not just reading 2 or 3 lines of text with all these abbreviations for the words. You want to make sure that you're really explaining to the tenant what the property is like, what all the features are, what the benefits of those features are, what it would really feel like to live in this property. Now the third P is price. As the property manager, it is your responsibility to communicate with your landlord about what pricing structure you should be using on this property. Now ultimately, you're absolutely right if you're saying, but the landlord won't let me reduce the price. And that does happen at times. But as the professional, it's really your responsibility to communicate what the marketplace is saying, because it's not what you're saying, it really is what the marketplace is saying. So that might be initially by providing a comparative market analysis to the landlord, showing them what pricing the area is getting, what pricing similar properties to this one is achieving. But then as you go through the marketing campaign, it's just providing feedback to the landlord about what the tenants are saying the property is worth in their opinion, and continuing to educate your landlord about that pricing structure. Because ultimately, if you get those 3 Ps right, you will be able to lease a property. If you're presenting the property well, if you're promoting it appropriately, and if the price is fair in the marketplace, you'll be able to lease it. Now, something else to keep in mind if you're struggling to rent a property is the value you place on tenants. Now, in a strong rental market, quite often we get a little bit lazy when it comes to looking after our tenants, because ultimately it is the landlord who pays us. So we place a really high value on our landlords, and that's very appropriate to value them and look after them, because they are the ones that are paying our invoice. However, if you've got high vacancy, you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep your current tenants and keep them happy. So that might be doing things like providing a newsletter to them. It might be doing things like offering incentives and rewards for your really good tenants who are looking after the property well, who are paying their rent on time, who are particularly good in their garden. I know that some agencies like to offer little promotions and little competitions for their tenants. And so you want to get to be known in your area as the agency that looks after tenants as well, because if you've got high vacancy and a tenant is trying to choose between the 3-bedroom house you've got for lease and the 3-bedroom house that your competitor has for lease, if they have a nicer experience with you and there's not too much different between the two houses, they will choose your agency because you're more pleasant to deal with. So in a tougher rental market, you do need to look at making sure that you look after your tenants as well. So look after the ones you've already got, if they're good ones, and then look after your good quality tenants who are applying for rental properties as well. And that might also mean that if you're creating a tenant newsletter, you might actually offer that tenant newsletter to your prospective tenants as well and maintain them on a database as well, because in an area with high vacancy, you want to make sure that you're marketing to prospective tenants as well as looking after your current tenants. And then the last thing I suggest when it comes to trying to rent out a property that's a bit tricky to rent is be flexible. So my opinion is that everything in real estate is a negotiation. And quite often we remember that there's some negotiation between the agency and the landlord, because quite often the landlord will ask for a fee reduction or an extra service or something like that, and quite often we're open to having those discussions, but we forget that there's often negotiation to be made between tenant and landlord via us as the agency. So I know that we've all seen in difficult to rent areas or in high vacancy areas promotions like a week's free rent or 2 weeks free rent, or throwing little extra things in to entice a tenant into leasing this particular property. In some cases there might be a reduction in the rent. You might be open to taking an offer from a tenant. If the marketplace is higher in vacancy, you might want to consider doing something like that. Some other things you might want to look at are throwing in little extras. So if you're in an area that has high vacancy, you might promote that this particular property comes with a garden maintenance contract. So the gardener might come out once a week or once a fortnight to mow the lawns, and that can be a nice little incentive to attract a tenant in where otherwise you might not be able to. So I think it's really important to be flexible and open to negotiation when it comes to trying to rent in a high vacancy area or trying to rent just a difficult to lease property. Just being flexible and open to ideas and encouraging tenants to make offers to you that you can consider and that you can discuss with your landlord, because ultimately every week that property sits vacant, your landlord is losing hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So if you can secure a good quality tenant and you can be creative about how you secure that good quality tenant, your landlord will be really, really grateful. Now, if you've got any questions about renting out a property in a high vacancy area or just a difficult to rent property, feel free to contact me at rentrollstarter.com.au. Also, if you've got some other creative ideas about how you've rented out difficult to rent properties, I'd love for you to leave comments in the comment section below and just let me know what you've done to try and rent out one of those difficult to lease properties. I look forward to hearing your really cool ideas, and I look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Ellen from Rent Roll Starter. I'll see you next time. Bye.